Hi everyone, Nico from Popcorn Sunday Animation here with another pixel art tutorial. I'm really excited because today we'll be getting into doing some animation in Clip Studio Paint. To get you started, I'm going to show you how to do a very basic attack animation with our little ninja guy. As you can see, it is very basic. No secondary action, no anticipation. He just kind of shuffle steps forward, swings his sword a couple times, and shuffle steps backwards. Later in the series, I'll show you how to do much more fluid, dynamic looking animation. But for the purposes of just showing you the basics of where everything is, I wanted to embrace the cheesiness of retro RPGs and keep this one super simple. Pixel animation is just traditional 2D animation. So it uses the same process that you would use to make anime or old Disney movies. It's just at a much lower resolution. Let's pop open a sprite sheet and you'll see what I mean. In traditional 2D animation, you break an action down to its key parts and draw a new drawing or cell for each part. The more drawings you do, the smoother the animation will look. But unlike Disney, we're not really going for smooth. We're trying to do as much as we can with as few drawings as possible. Let's look at the middle column on Radio's sprite sheet. It's her basic attack. As you can see, it's only 5 drawings. Her step forward animation on the top is only 2. Pixel animation is all about doing more with less. So fewer drawings with just the right poses is much better than a ton of drawings with more complicated action. So that's what we're going to be trying to emulate here. Just to clear up any confusion in terms, let's talk about the difference between a cell and a frame. Now, you may often hear animators use those terms interchangeably. I know I'll mess up and do it myself, but there actually is a difference. So a cell is an individual drawing. So looking again at the sprite sheet, each one of those sprites would be considered a cell. A frame is actually a measurement of time. It's how long you hold an individual cell for. Frames are basically fractions of a second. So your frame rate, which you may have heard of before, 24 frames per second, 30 frames per second, 60 frames per second. That basically means how many individual frames are you going to show in 1 second's worth of time. If you wanted to make a animation at 30 frames per second, that means that you could have 30 individual drawings in a second of animation. Or 15 frames per second means there would only be 15 drawings for the same amount of time. So just keep in mind that a cell is a drawing and a frame is a measurement of time. So let's get started. Here I am in Clip Studio Paint, and I'm going to open up my little ninja guy. I actually designed him in Photoshop, but thankfully Clip Studio Paint is smart and understands Photoshop files, so I can just bring him right in with layers and everything intact. Now he needs a little bit more room to move around, so I'm just going to change the canvas size. You'll notice that I hit that little anchor point. That way, instead of expanding all around him, since I know he's only moving forward, I'm just going to add some more pixels to in front of him. Then I'm going to take my selection tool and I want to cut out his arm. So I'm just going to select around his arm here. And then I'm going to cut and paste that onto a new layer. But you'll notice we have a problem here because the shading is on a different layer from the rest of the artwork. I actually only cut out the shading. So what I need to do is to shift click to select them both, and then I right click to merge the 2 layers. Now let's try selecting these again. There we go. So I've got just his arms selected. And then I will cut that and paste it onto a brand new layer. So now you should see that his arm is on one layer and his body is on the other. This is important because since he's just going to be doing a basic sword swing motion to start off with, I just want to focus on the movement of his arm. And I'm going to cheat a little bit. Instead of actually redrawing the arm completely, I'm going to kind of rough it in first just by duplicating this arm and moving it around. But first, you'll notice there was a little bit of an anti-aliasing problem where it just kind of half selected some pixels, so they're a little transparent. So that's where I'm just taking my 1 pixel brush and cleaning those up, then getting onto his body layer to erase that little bit excess. So yep, there we go. That's nice and clean looking. So now we're ready to start roughing in this animation. And always name your layers. Give them some kind of a sensible name, because whether you're doing any kind of art or animation, you're always going to end up with lots of layers. And it's better to actually have them have some names that make sense. So now we've got a body layer and an arm layer. And then I want to create an animation timeline. If you aren't sure where that is, just go under Window and look for Timeline. So there, I hid the timeline. Yep, there we go. And then we want to click on this little button, which creates a new animation timeline. And as I mentioned before, we can get away with a pretty low frame rate. So I'm going to set this to 15 to start off with. That way I don't have to do quite as many drawings. So now I'm going to duplicate the layer, but once again, we've run into a little bit of an issue because you'll see that right now it's all on it's all different layers on different timelines. We actually want all of our drawings for the arm to be on one timeline and all our drawings for the body to be on another. So what we do to fix that is we click on this little button here that creates a new animation folder. So I'm going to create a folder for the arm and a folder for the body. A folder is basically a timeline that holds all your drawings. And then I've just clicked and dragged those the drawings that I've made into the folders, and I'll give them a logical name. So I'll call my folder arm, and then my first arm drawing will just be called 1. So now when I duplicate it, you'll see it automatically names my next drawing 2. That helps make it a lot easier to keep track of your animation cells when they're named this way. But now you'll notice my canvas is completely blank. You'll see in the little thumbnails on the side, it shows that it has these drawings available, but they're not showing up. That's because we haven't actually assigned a cell in the timeline. So if you right-click on your timeline, you can actually assign a cell just by picking the name of that layer. So there we go. I have my arm number 1 and arm number 2 and the body all showing now. So now we're ready to start roughing in the animation. I'm going to once again select arm number 2, and then I'm going to use my transform tool. I'm going to grab that little pivot point in the center and put it about where his shoulder would be. The reason I move the pivot point, let me show you what happens if I don't. See, it's automatically in the middle, so then I'd have to like move the whole arm around and try to get it repositioned. It's a lot easier to just have it rotate around where the shoulder would naturally be. So now I can already kind of see what my arm position is going to look like. And yes, this has made the pixels look all kinds of screwy and messy, I know, and that's fine. We're just roughing in the basic movements here. we'll clean up these drawings in a little bit. So now I've duplicated arm number 1 once again, and by default it named it 1A. I renamed it to 3. And now, so this time I'm going to do the end of the swing. So I positioned the arm for the beginning of the swing where he's raising his arm up, and now I position the arm for the end of the swing where it's all the way down. And now you can see as we just click and drag or scrub through the timeline, we can see the basic arm movement. I can also play it through, and we can see that we're starting to get a little bit of rough motion here. Please excuse the nasty aspect ratio and resolution change that's about to happen here in a second. Me and OBS are still working out our differences, but basically what happened was, yep, there it goes. So what happened was when I was originally recording this as I was working, I didn't actually start recording until after I had cut out the arm and laid in the first couple of frames. And it occurs to me now that you guys might actually like to see that process, so I went back in and re-recorded that bit later on, and apparently some of my settings changed, and I'm only just now noticing that. So my apologies on that one. But coming back to the animation, you'll notice that his sword swing looks really unrealistic and unnatural right now. And the reason why that is because he keeps his elbow bent through the entire sword swing. All cheapy animation aside, that is just not how you swing a sword. You don't keep your elbow bent the whole time. There's just no power in that. So to make it look more realistic, I need to actually draw a frame from scratch where his arm is fully extended. So I've just given myself a blank frame here, and now I'm going to click this little button. What that does is it turns on onion skinning. Onion skinning is a feature that lets you see the drawing before and the drawing after, which just makes it a lot easier to then make a drawing in the middle, because I've got a frame of reference. I'm not just drawing blind. So I'm just going to start kind of roughing in an arm. For some reason, my eraser settings got messed up, so I'm messing with that a little bit. And what I'm noticing here is I don't have enough room in front of him for him to extend that sword. So I'm going to change my canvas size again. And one of the things I really like about Clip Studio is it previews what that size change is going to look like. So it takes some of the guesswork out. So now with a 100 pixel canvas, I actually have enough room to have his sword extend out, you know, like you would if you were swinging a sword. So I'm just going to rough in the sword here a little bit. And, sometimes I like when I'm roughing in animation to just do it in silhouette like this. For one thing, it's faster than trying to draw in color, but also it lets me make sure that my drawing is really clear. If it doesn't read well as just a black on white silhouette, doesn't matter what I do with the line work, it's still not going to read well. So it's just a good way for me to kind of check my work as I'm going. So now I'll go ahead and start coloring in the sword and putting in the outline. So I know at this point the sword looks pretty chunky and nasty. That's just one of the things about pixel art. You know, sometimes you don't have enough pixels to make those nice smooth lines. So, when his sword is going vertical or horizontal, all my pixels can line up in nice, neat little lines and it looks great. But when it's got to go diagonal, you end up with these chunky, weird lines. Now I'm going to go back in and refine it to the best of my ability. But to some extent, that's just the nature of pixel art. And so you just kind of have to embrace the fact that there are going to be some odd looking frames and, just do your best to minimize it and work with it. So now finally, I will draw in that missing bit of his arm. And I'm just going to go through and start cleaning up those other frames. And I'm just doing what's known as scrubbing back and forth through the animation. That's just clicking and dragging the playhead. And now I'm playing it, and I see that by default, Clip gave me way too many frames to work with. So what I'm going to do is just shorten my timeline. So you'll notice these little blue flags at the beginning and the end. Those define your timeline. And just by clicking and dragging that ending flag down, you can shorten or lengthen your timeline. So now I can play through, and because I've pushed the loop button, this will actually repeat. So I can really look at it and see how the drawings themselves are looking, is the posing clear? And also I can see how my timing's looking. Um, you know, is everything holding for enough frames? Is it going too slow? Is it going too fast? And this frame was driving me crazy, so I'm just going to stop for a moment. Scrub through my timeline, and I'll see that, whoa, the sword is really growing here. You don't want that in your animation. That's one reason why we scrub through the frames, and why you'll see me playing my animation on a loop so much is I'm checking to see if everything is maintaining its correct proportions. Are things shrinking and growing? Or is everything staying nice and even? Because you don't want stuff shrinking and growing that shouldn't be shrinking and growing. You don't want the sword to suddenly get extra double thick on you or something like it did there. So I'll just refine that, scrub through, make sure, yep, now it looks like the sword is staying the same size throughout this motion. So that is good. Now I'm adding frame 1 at the end of this, just to, get him back in position to be set up for the second slash in the animation. So as I'm playing it through, two things occurred to me. One, it's going too slow. And the other is that all the rest of the animation in the video is going to be at 30 frames per second. So I really need to change that. So I'm just going to go into timeline settings, and I can change the frame rate. There we go. You always want to be animating at a consistent frame rate throughout. So if you know that other segments of the animation are 30 frames per second, animate at 30 frames per second. I don't know why I started at 15. I just had a weird brain fart. But now at 30, actually the speed is a lot nicer. That looks like a much quicker, more powerful swing now. So now that my poses are looking pretty good, the actual cells, the drawings, now I want to work on the timing. A lot of animation isn't so much about what you see, it's about what you feel. Meaning that, holding something for an extra frame longer or shortening it can actually change a lot of how realistic the animation is. So I'm just going to adjust my timing. And I want to be able to zoom in on my timeline, so you'll see that I clicked on that little magnifying glass. That way I can get in a little bit closer, so I can start to adjust how long my drawings hold for. And this is one thing that really annoys me about Clip Studio Paint, is there's no button that you can push to extend the exposure to basically add frames to a cell. You have to do it by clicking and dragging the little lines in between the frames around like this, which can be a little bit cumbersome and annoying until you get used to it. So I've just had drawing 4 hold a little bit longer, try even having that hold longer. And then I'll play it and see how that looks. You can see how that little change kind of changed how fast or how powerful the swing looks. I'm actually going to have him hold drawing number 2, cell number 2, a little bit longer. Having him hold his arm up in the air this little bit longer will actually give a little bit more power to the swing. See how that just looks a little bit more powerful, having him pull his arm back for longer and swing forward for a shorter amount of time. So that's what I mean by, the feeling of a piece of animation. So just by holding a cell for 1 frame longer, 1 frame shorter can really change how that feels, and therefore how realistic it looks. So now that I've got my timing roughly where I want it to be, I can start adding in the second sword swing. That's pretty easy. I'm just going to repeat the same series of cells to create the second swing. And I'm going to hold them for the same amount of time. So you see that I'm counting how many cells I hold frame 2 for, and then just right-clicking to pull up that little menu where I get to select which cell, and assigning a cell. And then I'll just move forward, right-click, say there's cell 1. All right, so now I'll just play my animation back at speed. Make sure that I'm relatively happy with how this looks. Yeah, the one arm's working. I mean, it's still some pretty low budget animation. I don't have any motion in the other arm, which you would normally want to see. There's no action in the head. So let's fix that up a little bit by adding some motion to the body. So you'll see that I have created a new animation folder for the body. And I'm finally getting around to cleaning up my folder names, which I showed you guys at the beginning of the video. Just like I did with the arm, I'm going to duplicate the body drawing. So now I have 2 identical drawings on my timeline. So that way he'll start still how he looks on cell 1. And then I'm going to change the legs and body position in cell 2. So you'll see that I'm keeping everything that I want to stay the same. So like the feet were really tricky to draw. So I erased out the legs, but I'm just going to select and move that foot forward and then draw a new leg in. Here we go. Just starting to get the leg shape locked in. This is basically the pose where he has both feet together. For him, I'm just doing kind of a cheap little shuffle forward step. So he's going to go from legs apart to legs together like this. Of course, if I wanted this to be a nicer, more realistic looking step, I would actually have him raise his foot, because, normally you should raise your foot to take a step, not just kind of slide your feet together in a weird little shuffle. But I like his weird little shuffle, so for my purposes, this works. So now I need a third drawing, which is going to be him with his other foot forward. So I just duplicated drawing 1 again. I'm going to move him forward so it actually looks like he's stepping forward. So for my third drawing, this is going to be him with the other foot forward. So to complete the move, I need the front foot, or the foot that's closest to us, to move forward, the foot that's further from us to move backwards. So basically I just need to flip the position of the legs. And as I'm doing this, I'm going to show you a little eccentricity of Clip Studio Paint and how to work around it. And that is that when you're in the animation timeline and you want to cut and paste something, Clip Studio always cuts and pastes onto a new layer. That's fine when you're just working in regular layers mode, but when you're in the animation timeline, that can be really troublesome because in the animation timeline, it sees each frame as a separate drawing, and you have to assign them to the timeline separately. So this causes a problem if you want to cut a character apart and move some parts around like I'm doing here. So my workaround for that over in the layers panel is I've actually taken those new leg layers and I just clicked and dragged all of these layers up out of my animation folder. That way I can see them all at once and I can work on them all at once. So that's just a nice little workaround for that. And I'll merge them together later. But as you can see here, I'm just starting to draw in the legs. I wanted him kind of up on the ball of his back foot. And then for the front foot, just kind of get that roughed in, and then I can refine it. There we go. And now that I have my outline roughly how I like it, you'll see that I'm just going to shift click and then right click to merge all my layers together into one drawing. So now everything's back together as one drawing instead of separate layers. So I can feed that back into my timeline, which I'll do here in a moment. But I just want to finish getting the legs colored in first. Work with that shadow a little bit more. Yeah, that looks all right. So now I just click and drag that drawing back into the animation folder, and you'll see that it's shown back up on my timeline. Make sure that he's actually, taking one full step, that he's not stepping too little or too much for his foot position, and that looks all right. But then what I'm noticing is that his arm, because it's on a separate layer, isn't moving forward with his body correctly, which looks pretty strange. So I just need to duplicate that layer and move it forward. So that's what I'm doing here. I'll just play it through, make sure it looks all right. I'm just gonna go to layer 2, slide it forward. Yeah, look how short his arm got there on cell 4. So move that forward. Same thing for 3. Same thing for 1. Oops. And because, remember, anytime you change the position on one cell, it's going to affect all the instances of the cell. So that's why I didn't have to move the second instance of cell number 2. Now you'll see, because I moved cell number 1 forward, his arm really gets away from his body right here. So I need to make those different. So you see there, I'm going to have drawing 1 actually attach up to his body. And drawing 1A will be the one where his arm has moved forward. And as always, Don't forget to save your work. So now I've got his little shuffle step forward working the way that I want. The last thing that I want to do is also give him a step backwards so he can step forwards, do his attack, and then step back into the line with the rest of the characters. And to do that, I'm just going to use the same cells that I used for the step forward, but show them in reverse order. So first off, I'll just extend the timeline to accommodate the new frames that I'm going to be adding. And now I was a little bit skeptical as to whether or not I would need to make any modifications to cell number 2. So to err on the side of caution, I duplicated it. That way, if I did need to make any changes, I could just do that real quick. So that's why you see that I created a duplicate, a 2A, that I'm plugging in here. So there's 2A. And that's looking good. And we'll go here and extend 2A where I want it. And then I just need to drop cell 3 in place. There we go, just right clicking on the timeline, put 3 in, and actually that's wrong. Because we're going in reverse order, I actually want to put cell number 1 in. So it goes 3, 2, 1. And then just scrub through, make sure that there's nothing that's looking weird or needs to be changed. And then I'll just play it back at speed. And there you have it, our super basic little attack animation. He does his little shuffle step forward, swings his sword twice, and does his little shuffle step backwards. And that's all there is to it. Hopefully you found this basic animation tutorial somewhat interesting or helpful. If you end up doing your own attack animations or any other kind of animation really with these techniques, I would absolutely love to see them. So please do share links with me in the comments. Coming up next, I'm going to be showing more advanced dynamic animation techniques with pixel animation. I'm actually going to be doing a special attack, so that'll involve a lot more high quality animation as well as some special effects. So if you've ever wanted to know how to do pixel art like magic effects and the nice flashy glowy little effects, we're going to be getting into some of that in upcoming tutorials as well. Also, I'm getting near the end of the pixel art series, and I'd like to be able to switch gears and go into a different form of animation or motion graphics or something like that. So if there's any animation techniques or animation software that you've been interested in learning, please leave a comment. Give me some ideas for what kinds of topics you'd like to see covered in the next series. So thanks a bunch for watching, and I will see you next time. Bye.